Chapter 6. Graphic Representation of Language. 1. Need for studying the subject. The concrete object of linguistic science is the social product deposited in the brain of each individual. It is language. But the product differs with linguistic groups. We have to work with languages. The linguist is obliged to acquaint himself with the greatest possible number of languages in order to determine what is universal in them by observing and comparing them. But we generally learn about languages only through writing. Even in studying our native language, we constantly make use of written texts. The necessity of using written evidence increases when dealing with remote idioms, and all the more when studying idioms that no longer exist. We would have direct text at our disposal in every instance only if people had always done what is now being done in Paris and Vienna. There, samples of all languages are being recorded. Even so, recorded specimens could be made available to others only through writing. Writing, though unrelated to its inner system, is used continually to represent language. We cannot simply disregard it. We must be acquainted with its usefulness, shortcomings, and dangers. 2. Influence of writing. Reasons for its ascendance over the spoken form. Language and writing are two distinct systems of science. The second exists for the sole purpose of representing the first. The linguistic object is not both the written and the spoken form of words. The spoken forms alone constitute the object. But the spoken word is so intimately bound to its written image that the latter manages to usurp the main role. People attach even more importance to the written image of a vocal sign than to the sign itself. A similar mistake would be in thinking that more can be learned about someone by looking at his photograph than by viewing him directly. This illusion, which has always existed, is reflected in many of the notions that are currently bandied about on the subject of language. Take the notion that an idiom changes more rapidly when writing does not exist. Nothing could be further from the truth. Writing may retard the process of change under certain conditions, but its absence in no way jeopardizes the preservation of language. The oldest written text of Lithuanian, which is still spoken in Eastern Prussia and in a part of Russia, date from 1540. But the language of even that late period offers a more faithful picture of Proto-Indo-European than does Latin of 300 BCE. This one example is enough to show the extent to which languages are independent of writing. During the whole Old High German period, people wrote Toten, Fullen, Stutzen. Near the end of the 12th century, the forms Töten, Hüllen appeared, but Stutzen subsisted. How did the difference originate? Wherever the umlaut occurred, there was a Y in the following syllable. Proto-Germanic had Daupian, Folgen, but Stauten. At the very beginning of the literary period, about 800, the Y became so weak that no trace of it appears in writing for 3 centuries. Still, a slight trace had remained in the spoken form. That is how it miraculously reappeared as a umlaut around 1180. Without the help of writing, a slight difference in pronunciation was accurately transmitted. Thus, language does have a definite and stable oral tradition that is independent of writing, but the influence of the written form prevents our seeing this. The first linguists confused language and writing, just as the humanists had done before them. Even Bopp failed to distinguish clearly between letters and sounds. His works give the impression that a language and its alphabet are inseparable. His immediate successors fell into the same trap. The transcription th for the fricative th caused Grimm to think not only that th was a double sound, but also that it was an aspirated occlusive, and he accordingly assigned it a specific place in his law of consonantal mutation, or Lautverschiebung. Still today, intelligent men confuse language and writing. To take but one example, Gaston Duchamp credited Berthelot with preserving French from ruin because he had opposed spelling reform. But how is the influence of writing to be explained? 1. First, the graphic form of words strikes us as being something permanent and stable, better suited than sound to account for the unity of language throughout time. Though it creates a purely fictitious unity, the superficial bond of writing is much easier to grasp than the only true bond, the bond of sound. 2. Most people pay more attention to visual impressions simply because these are sharper and more lasting than oral impressions. That is why they show a preference for the former. The graphic form manages to force itself upon them at the expense of sound. 3. The literary language adds to the undeserved importance of writing. It has its dictionaries and grammars. In school, children are taught from and by means of books. Language is apparently governed by a code. The code itself consists of a written set of strict rules of usage, orthography. And that is why writing acquires a primary importance. The result is that people forget that they learn to speak before they learn to write, and the natural sequence is reversed. 4. Finally, when there is a disagreement between language and orthography, settlement of the dispute is difficult for everyone except the linguist. And since he is given no voice in the matter, the written form almost inevitably wins out, for any solution supported by it is easier. Thus, writing assumes undeserved importance. 3. Systems of writing. There are only two systems of writing. 1. In an ideographic system, each word is represented by a single sign that is unrelated to the sounds of the word itself. Each written sign stands for a whole word and, consequently, for the idea expressed by the word. The classic example of an ideographic system of writing is Chinese. 2. The system commonly known as phonetic tries to reproduce the succession of sounds that make up a word. Phonetic systems are sometimes syllabic, sometimes alphabetic, it is, based on the irreducible elements used in speaking. Moreover, ideographic systems freely become mixtures when certain ideograms lose their original value and become symbols of isolated sounds. The statement that written word tends to replace the spoken one in our minds is true of both systems of writing, but the tendency is stronger in the ideographic system. To a Chinese, an ideogram and a spoken word are both symbols of an idea. To him, writing is a second language, and if two words that have the same sound are used in conversation, he may resort to writing in order to express his thought. But in Chinese, the mental substitution of the written word for the spoken word does not have the annoying consequences that it has in a phonetic system, for the substitution is absolute. The same graphic symbol can stand for words from different Chinese dialects. I shall limit discussion to the phonetic system, and especially to the one used today, the system that stems from the Greek alphabet. Unless borrowed and already marked by inconsistencies, when first devised, a phonetic alphabet gives a fairly rational representation of language. With respect to logic, Greek is especially noteworthy. But the harmonious relation between writing and pronunciation does not last. Why? This question must be examined. 4. Reasons for the discrepancy between writing and pronunciation. Of the numerous causes of lack of agreement between writing and pronunciation, I shall recall only the more important ones. First, language is constantly evolving, whereas writing tends to remain stable. The result is that a point is reached where writing no longer corresponds to what it is supposed to record. A transcription that is accurate at a particular moment will be absurd a century later. For a time, people may change their graphic symbols to conform with changes in pronunciation, then relinquish the effort. This happened in French in the case of wa. Examples: pronunciation, 11th century. Rei, lei. Written forms R-E-I, L-E-I. 13th century. Roi, loi. Written forms R-O-I, L-O-I. 14th century. Roi, loi. Written forms R-O-I, L-O-I. 19th century. Roi, loi. Written forms R-O-I, L-O-I. Up until period 2, changes in pronunciation were recorded. Each step in the history of the language was matched by a corresponding step in the history of writing. But after the 14th century, the written form of the words remained unchanged while the evolution of the language continued. From that moment, the discrepancy between the language and its orthography increased progressively. Finally, the practice of joining discordant terms had its repercussion on the graphic system itself. The combination OI acquired a value that was unrelated to either O or I. Such examples could be multiplied indefinitely. For instance, why should the French write maïs, but, and fait, fact, when the words are pronounced mais and fait? Why does C often have the value of S? The answer is that French has retained outmoded spellings. Spelling always lags behind pronunciation. The L in French is today changing to Y. Speakers say éveiller, mouiller, just as they say essuyer, wipe, nettoyer, clean. But the written forms of these words are still éveiller, awaken, mouiller, soak. Another reason for discrepancy between spelling and pronunciation is this. If an alphabet is borrowed from another language, its resources may not be appropriate for their new function. Expedients will have to be found. Exempli gratia, the use of two letters to designate a single sound. Take the voiceless dental fricative th of the Germanic languages. Since Latin had no sign for this sound, th was used. The Merovingian king Chilperic tried to add a special symbol for this sound to the Latin alphabet, but his attempt was unsuccessful and th won acceptance. During the Middle Ages, English had a closed e, exempli gratia, seed, and an open e, exempli gratia, lead. Since the alphabet failed to provide distinct symbols for the two sounds, the spellings S-E-E-D and L-E-A-D were devised. French uses the double symbol CH to stand for hushing, sh, etc. The influence of etymology also helps to widen the gap between spelling and pronunciation. It has been especially strong during certain periods, exempli gratia, the Renaissance. Even a false etymology often forces itself into the spelling of a word. D was inserted in French pois, weight, as if the word were derived from Latin pondus. Pois actually comes from pensum. Whether the application of the principle is correct matters little. The fallacy is in spelling words according to their etymology. Other reasons for the discrepancy are not so obvious. Some absurdities cannot be excused even on etymological grounds. Why was THUN used instead of TUN, in German. The H was said to represent the aspiration that followed the initial consonant, but it would have to be inserted wherever aspiration occurs, and many similar words were never written with H, tugen, dich, etc. 5. Results of discrepancy. To classify the inconsistencies of writing would take too long. One salient disadvantage is the multiplicity of symbols that stand for the same sound. For je, French uses J, G, Ge, joli, pretty, jolie, freeze, J, J. For Z, both Z and S. For S, C, cedilla and T, nation, nation, SC, acquiescer, acquiesce, S cedilla, acquiescent, acquiescent, X, dies, 10. And for K, it uses C, QU, K, CH, CC, CQU, acquérir, acquire. Conversely, a single symbol stands for several values. T stands for T or S, G for G or je, etc. Indirect spellings also merit our attention. There is no double consonant in Zettel, Teller, etc. German uses TT, LL, etc. for the sole purpose of indicating that the preceding vowel is open and short. Through a similar aberration, English adds a final silent E to lengthen the preceding vowel, MAD, MADE. The E, which actually affects only the preceding syllable, creates a second syllable for the I. These irrational spellings still stand for something in language, but others have neither rhyme nor reason. French has no double consonants except the old futures mourrai, I shall die, courai, I shall run, etc. Yet, illegitimate double consonants abound in the orthography of the language. Bourreau, surly, sottise, foolishness, souffrir, suffer, etc. Being unstable and striving always for regularity, writing may vacillate at times. The result is fluctuating orthographies that stem from efforts to record sounds at different periods. Take erther, erder, erder, or three, drie, drie of Old High German. Th, dh, d stand for the same phonic element. But which element? Writing does not provide the answer. The complication that arises is this. Confronted with two spellings for the same word, we cannot always decide whether two pronunciations are actually represented. Suppose that texts of neighboring dialects show the spelling ASCA for a word in one of the dialects and ASCHA for the same word in the other. If the sound is the same, the transcriptions point to an orthographic fluctuation. If not, the difference is phonological and dialectal, as in the Greek forms paizo, paidzdo, paido, or two successive periods may be involved. The English forms what, will, etc. were later replaced by what, will, etc. Does this point to a graphic change or to a phonetic change? The preceding discussion boils down to this. Writing obscures language. It is not a guise for language, but a disguise. That fact is clearly illustrated by the spelling of French OISEAU, bird. Not one spoken sound, oiseau, is indicated by its own symbol. Here, writing fails to record any part of the picture of language. Another result is that the less writing represents what it is supposed to represent, the stronger the tendency to use it as a basis becomes. Grammarians never fail to draw attention to the written form. Psychologically, the tendency is easily explained, but its consequences are annoying. Free use of the words pronounce and pronunciation sanctions the abuse and reverses the real, legitimate relationship between writing and language. Whoever says that a certain letter must be pronounced a certain way is mistaking the written image of a sound for the sound itself. For French OI to be pronounced wa, this spelling would have to exist independently. Actually, WR is written OI. To attribute the oddity to an exceptional pronunciation of O and I is also misleading, for this implies that language depends on its written form, and that certain liberties may be taken in writing, as if the graphic symbols were the norm. False notions about the relationship between sound and graphic symbols appear even in grammatical rules, as in the case of French H. Some words that begin with an unaspirated vowel are written with H through remembrance of the Latin forms. Homme, H-O-M-M-E, man, formerly O-M-E, because of Latin homo. But in words of Germanic origin, initial H was actually pronounced hache, hatchet, harang, herring, honte, shame, etc. As long as aspiration was used, words of Germanic origin obeyed the laws governing initial consonants. Speakers said du hasches, du hatchets, le hareng, the herring. Other words obeyed the laws governing initial vowels. Speakers said deux hommes, two men, l'homme, the man. For that period, the rule liaison and elision do not occur before aspirated H was correct, but nowadays the formula is meaningless. Aspirated H no longer exists unless the label is applied to something which is not a sound but which prevents liaison and elision. Again, we are involved in a vicious circle, and H is but a fictitious offspring of writing. The pronunciation of a word is determined not by its spelling, but by its history. The form of a word at a particular moment stands for a moment in its enforced evolution. Precise laws govern its evolution. Each step is determined by the preceding step. The only thing to consider is the one most often forgotten, the evolution of the word, its etymology. The name of the town, Auch, is Auch in phonetic transcription. That is the only French word in which final ch stands for sh. But we explain nothing by saying final ch is pronounced sh only in Auch. The only question that concerns us is this: how could Latin ausci have changed to Auch? Orthography is unimportant. Should French gageure, wager, be pronounced with e or u? Some speakers say gageur, for hour is pronounced heure. Others say no, it's gageure, for je is equivalent je, as in geol, jail. The argument is pointless. The real issue is etymological. Gageure was formed from gager, earn, just as tournure, figure, was formed from tourner, turn. Only gageure is justifiable. Gageure is due solely to the equivocal nature of writing. But the tyranny of writing goes even further. By imposing itself upon the masses, spelling influences and modifies language. This happens only in highly literate languages where written texts play an important role. Then visual images lead to wrong pronunciations. Such mistakes are really pathological. Spelling practices cause mistakes in the pronunciation of many French words. For instance, there were two spellings for the surname Lefebvre, from Latin faber, one popular and simple, the other learned and etymological. Lefevre and Lefebvre. Lefebvre was read as Lefebvre, with a B that had never really existed and a U that was the result of ambiguity. Now, the latter form is actually pronounced. Mispronunciations due to spelling will probably appear more frequently as time goes on, and the number of letters pronounced by speakers will probably increase. Some Parisians already pronounce the T in sept femmes, 7 women. Darmstädter foresees the day when even the last 2 letters of 20 will be pronounced. Truly an orthographic monstrosity. Such phonic deformations belong to language, but do not stem from its natural functioning. They are due to an external influence. Linguistics should put them into a special compartment for observation. They are teratological cases.